Well, no Mark this week, so you're left with just me and James. I hope that's all right to people listening. Premier League review. We're going to start at the Emirates. James, you were there.
Yeah.
Arsenal are going to win the title, aren't they?
I mean, yeah, we just give it to them now. Don't need to play the next 6 or 7 months. I mean, look, they are... for anybody who didn't see the game, don't worry, you've seen the game. It was very similar to a number of performances this season. Very, very good defensively. The goal comes from a set piece, and the piece I did from the game was sort of focus on this phrase that Arteta used when he was talking about Eze a few weeks ago. He talked about him being capable of these magic moments, and that's what we got on Sunday. We saw Eze, great finish, settled the game, obviously against his former club. Narrative was set nice and easy right for once. But those magic moments are really important for Arsenal because of the way that they're set up. That they are such a resilient, controlled team that the foundation is so solid that the front 3 or 4 players are then asked to put themselves into positions to go and create one of those magic moments that can settle the game, because that's all they need. They only need one. They're not conceding goals. They're not conceding shots, basically. After the Fulham game the other week, when they took the lead at Fulham, which is I think 58 minutes in, Fulham had one shot of any description for the rest of the game. So they're not. It's not like the Alamo. It's not even like they're defending brilliantly. They're defending flawlessly at the moment. It is remarkable. Palace had the highest expected goals figure of any Premier League team going into the weekend. And with about 15, 20 minutes to go, I looked at it and it was 0.08 they created in the game. Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
It's 5 straight clean sheets, I think, now for Arsenal. In a way, it reminds me a little bit of Pep's really good City teams that it was about sort of last-ditch defending and great saves. It was about having so much control in a game that you just didn't let the other team breathe. And there seems to be, it's obvious to make the comparison with Arteta and Pep because they work together, obviously, but it does feel a little bit like that. They're just kind of squeezing the life out of teams, and then you've got the extra firepower with the likes of Eze and Gyökeres, perhaps, that you didn't have last year, to kind of go on and do whatever you need to do at the top end of the pitch to win the game. Yeah,
and they can change it. Trossard started, so Martinelli can come on. I mean, he took Saka off at 1-0 with about 25 minutes to go. It's quite rare for Saka to come off. Now he has had an illness, but last season he'd probably, having got himself into a position to play an hour, he would have probably played the whole game. So he's not afraid of making those in-game changes because he knows. I mean, Saliba went off at half-time, Mascara comes on, and there's no drop-off in defence, and that wouldn't have been the case last season. So that there are little improvements there. Look, I mean, the rest of the league needs to be worried if they start playing well. Yeah. If they start playing really well and creating chances.
Do you think they're not playing well?
I think defensively they're playing very well, but they're not flowing in an attacking sense. Everybody knows the reliance on set pieces. You don't look at the team and think that they're going to excite you particularly at the moment. They're extremely, and I mean this as a compliment. They're functional to a T. They're very, very good at what they do, but then they're not. I know they beat Atletico Madrid 4-0 in midweek, but they're not rolling teams over. They're not. Yeah. There's not the consistency in their attack yet, and if that comes, and that's understandable when you think that Gyökeres is such a different animal to anything they've had before. I spoke to Mikel and some of the execs in pre-season, and they talked about how they were having to change the style of play to suit Gyökeres, to make sure they were getting the ball forward quicker, to keep him essentially between the 2 centre-backs and trying to play him in behind and not kind of play this slightly more slow, methodical approach. But we're not really seeing that at the moment. We're seeing it at times, but when they take the lead in games, and Zubimendi, I think, has been the best of the signings, really, because he's been able to give them that control that you're talking about, where they can just see games out with quite a lot of comfort at the moment. I mean, if they start putting together the attack inside of it, and the set pieces is sort of an auxiliary element, not the main danger, then I don't see a team that can stop them, because Manchester City and Liverpool in particular have just sort of come back to the pack, haven't they?
So what would you say stops Arsenal winning the league from here? I know it's very early. It's obviously not even November yet. But if you were to look ahead and Arsenal don't win it, what has happened to Arsenal in that time to stop them winning it? Where's the danger for Arteta from here?
Well, I would say firstly that if they're going to continue to be, I mean, he resents the idea of playing with the handbrake, but they are pragmatic.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. If they continue to play with the high level of pragmatism that they are, then most of the games are going to be quite tight. And at the moment, the fine margins are going their way because of how well they're defending. They only need one magic moment, if you like, to win a game. That doesn't entirely feel sustainable. And I guess linked to that is the mentality, because they haven't been able to get over the line. This is a squad that's fallen short 3 consecutive years. And they had a big lead a couple of years ago going into April and lost the title. So we don't know if they can see it out. And I think that mentality is not going to be tested really until the spring. The bad news for everyone else is they could be 10 points clear by then.
Well, I mean, they could be. And you saw last year, Liverpool, by the time they started to kind of, not fall apart is the wrong word, but by the time they started to lose games and look a little bit suspect, they'd already won it anyway. So there is a possibility that Arsenal could, by the time it kind of becomes so real that you think, oh, hang on a minute, we're really like, they could have already won it. Because at the moment, it doesn't really feel like there is a genuine challenger at the moment, because Arsenal are winning games and playing all right, and no one else seems to be.
No, I mean, they've got, there's a couple of little tests coming up though. They've got Burnley at the weekend away. Yeah. Obviously they've started well, Burnley, and then they've got Sunderland away. Yeah. And that's a big week. They've got a Champions League away game in Slavia Prague in the middle of that as well. So they've got 3 away games in a row. Champions League, I mean, even if they lost to Slavia Prague, which I don't think they would, but even if they did, they're fine. They've won 3 out of 3. They're okay there. But those 2 league games, particularly the Sunderland game now with how well they've started, they're another little, they're just, it's all kind of building blocks in terms of their confidence. And that's why I think it was quite significant that Arteta talked after the game about what a big opportunity this weekend was, because he recognised that because the other teams had lost, the 2 traditional rivals, if you like, had lost, that's the kind of opportunity that Arsenal haven't been able to take in the past. They would have drawn that game and they'd be kicking themselves and thinking, okay, we've got a point, we should have really got 3, but they're winning these games now. And I was talking to one of the executives at the club the end of last week, and he pinpointed the Newcastle game as, I think internally they see that as such a big moment when they were obviously 1-0 down, and not only did they draw it late, they then won it late in stoppage time, again, set pieces. But I think we're talking about a squad that is trying to convince itself that it can go one better. These little building blocks in terms of their self-belief are so important. And Arteta's used it quite a lot through his 6 years at the club, actually, when he talk about this is the first time we've won at Old Trafford in however many years, or we've gone and won at Tottenham, or, these little milestones that they keep racking up, he strays into a bit of a silly territory when he starts saying, any other team would have won the title by now. That's not how it works. Yeah. But the point is, it's all building towards something. And what they've done, I think, and why their summer business was so impressive, was that they managed to sort of recreate that sense of momentum that it could have felt second again. Are we ever going to do it? But those 7 new signings have just really helped them get themselves to a place where they're on the front foot again. Combined with, of course, what we didn't really see coming was Liverpool's drop off and City not quite delivering.
Well, let's talk about that then. Obviously, Arsenal's run of form has been set against Liverpool's absolute disastrous month. It's 4 straight Premier League defeats, another one against Brentford on Saturday. Have you been surprised at what's happened at Liverpool given the start that they had, or can you understand what's happened given that there was an awful lot of change in the summer, perhaps more change than Arne Slot would have wanted?
Yeah, I mean, you go back to the opening night of the season when they won.
Yeah.
But you thought, they're open. This is not a team that's in control of itself. And that has only continued. Again, we're talking about fine margins. The margins went their way in those first few games. And now they're not. And, I think what we're seeing is an Arsenal team that has a rock-solid, clear identity of what it is and what it's trying to be, and a Liverpool team that doesn't know.
Yeah.
And that's understandable to some extent because of the change that they've had. Obviously, some of it in tragic circumstances, but they've obviously spent big money. They're clearly going to change the dynamic and the chemistry between, obviously, the attacking players, most obviously. But none of those players that have come in, really, You think about at fullback, they suddenly look like they've got major problems at fullback, despite obviously spending money in that area. They don't know what they want to be yet, and the team is destabilised as a result of that, and that's why I think you're seeing a drop off from Van Dijk can't hold it all together on his own. Salah the same. I mean, what do you think? What would you do if you were on a slot here? Would you kind of try and go back to what you were doing last season and take out some of the new players? Florian Wirtz seems to obviously a fantastic talent, but seems to have perhaps unsettled the balance in midfield. Do you go back to that, or do you persevere with it?
I mean, I think that if he was sat here now, he would probably be thinking, I wish I could go back and try and use the formula that worked so well last year and just get back to that as quickly as possible. And if you want to call it back to basics or whatever you want to call it, but get back to that because he knows that has worked. I think though he will feel that is quite dangerous, because if you leave out Isak and Wirtz, particularly because they're £100 million players, it comes with an awful lot of noise. And I think that because of the money that Liverpool have spent, he'll probably be thinking, I need to persevere with this. I need to reach a point where Wirtz is holding his own and getting the odd assist, and the noise around him has gone away. He'll hope that Isak can come back and start scoring goals, and that if there are problems, people are focused on different problems. This is the problem with recruitment in general and spending an awful lot of money, is it can weigh you down in it to a certain extent. And I don't think that Arsenal really have got that problem, because I think that Arteta can quite easily leave Eze out and quite easily leave Gyökeres out, and no one would really mention it too much, because they're not £100 million players. Maybe it's because they're obviously playing well. It's easier to rotate when you're playing well and winning games. But I just don't feel like it's as big an issue as if Arne Slot keeps leaving Wirtz out or keeps leaving Isak out, because they've spent so much money to bring them in. It just becomes this massive issue, and you see it at clubs when they sign big players that don't hit the ground running straight away. You are left with a problem there. Do you just persevere with it and risk the results getting worse, or do you sit him on the bench for a couple of weeks and hope things get better, but then have to answer question after question about why your main guy isn't starting? I just think that the way that Arne Slot is talking at the moment, I think you're probably right. I just don't think that he knows what direction he wants to go in at the moment. He's talking about the Brentford game being the worst defeat of the season. For a lot of that game, it looked like they were getting bullied physically, which is a massive problem at the moment in this league. I think maybe 5 years ago, you could probably get away with having a more lightweight team. The way the Premier League's gone, with it being more direct and more physical, a lot more set pieces, I just don't think you can get away with not winning duels all over the pitch. And if you start losing them, teams in this league start smelling blood. Brentford did exactly the same to Man United that they did to Liverpool. They just looked like they bullied them all over the place. And teams that are coming up against Liverpool in the next few weeks will look at that game and think, well, we can do something similar. If we've got the players to do it, we can do something similar. And I do think it's very easy for me to sit here and say in hindsight, because they're not playing well, I did think it was strange that they didn't sign or use some of the money to sign a more established number 6, because I don't think you can rely on Gravenberch to, as good as he's been, and I don't think he's the main problem in that team, but an established number, as Zubimendi type. I know they tried, but if you're going to go for Zubimendi, this is what I can never understand about clubs and recruitment. If you're going to go for Zubimendi, you've identified a part of your squad that's not good enough. That's why you've gone for that player. So if you've missed out on him, then why then have you gone and signed a centre forward? You either need a defensive midfield player or you don't.
Well, they might argue that it's a case of where the opportunities come.
Yeah, and there is an element of that, obviously.
And you can say that, Isak, the word all at the start of the summer was that he's not for sale, that Newcastle would not let him go. Now, obviously, he did an awful lot to force that move to happen, but there were no guarantees that, Isak would leave Newcastle this summer. So when he became available, and I feel like I was probably a bit guilty of this, thinking about it from an Arsenal perspective, thinking, well, if you want a centre forward and you want to go and win the league, then go and get him. Yeah. And maybe we were all a little bit duped into thinking, well, because of how good he is, you pay the money, you bring him in, he knows the league, he can slot straight in, and away you go. Now, what we've probably forgotten there is that he was training on his own for a long period of time. He had no pre-season, really, of any description. And he's also a player who reminds me a little bit of Robin van Persie, in that when he was at Arsenal, in that I think they've, from what I can tell, I think they've had to tailor his training to make sure he stays fit. And that's been a journey over a number of years. And Newcastle have found a position last season where they were able to get the best out of him. What he's being asked to do now, to go up a level to Liverpool, competing for the league and the Champions League with no pre-season, there's a recalibration there. And I don't think Liverpool quite know how to get the best out of him yet, both in terms of his physicality and obviously from a tactical perspective, because if you're going to spend the best part of 300 million quid on two players, then you assume that they're your 10 and your 9, and you expect them to develop an understanding and go and win you games on a regular basis. They barely play together, those two. And Slot, unfortunately, is in a position now where he either doubles down on that and is under pressure, as you say, from the money that they've spent to do that, or he says, actually, we need to go back to basics here. We need to maybe pick a team that's a little bit more defensively resilient, and say to your older front three, and maybe you include Ekitike in that because he has obviously had a pre-season and he started quite well, but you say to those front three, go and win us games and keep it a bit tight. The other thing, of course, is set pieces, and we obviously Arsenal, it's a stick that they're beaten with, but this is becoming the set piece season in the Premier League. You only need to look across the games of what happened this weekend. Arsenal's game was decided by a set piece. Liverpool conceded from set pieces. Man United conceded from set pieces. Tottenham won the game at Everton largely through set pieces. Villa, their goal against City came from a set piece. It's easy to deride it, and it's easy to sort of say, well, why is Mikel Arteta getting credit for something that Tony Pulis was chastised for many years? But that's a separate conversation. The fact of the matter is that they are absolutely vitally important now, and some teams are better at them than others. And this is another area where Liverpool are falling short. And then if we're talking about fine margins in title races, it could actually prove the difference. Because Arsenal are scoring, I think from corners they've scored, I think it's 16 or 17 more goals than any other team.
That's incredible
across the last 2 seasons. Now, that is a huge swing. Yeah. That's a huge swing. And so to ignore it and to sort of produce those Tony Pulis, Mikel Arteta memes, I get it. I can understand it. You could argue if you spend £1 billion, you should be about a bit more than corners and free kicks. Again, that's a separate argument. The point is, if you don't take this seriously, the league will be gone before you know it.
Yeah. And I think that the set piece element, I think that the Premier League is so competitive that it is coming down to fine margins like that, and that I think that the balance in the league is so much that I genuinely don't think there's a great difference between the top 6 and the bottom 6 in terms of athleticism, technical ability, anything like that, work rate. And I think if you can master those fine margins, as Arsenal clearly have, maybe it is a season that comes down to who performs best in those areas. And if you get left behind even for a couple of weeks, you end up losing 3 games and your season's kind of in bits almost.
Well, a team that's won 3 games is Manchester United. You were at Old Trafford. Are they back?
No. I do want to point out, though, that Mark, a couple of weeks ago on this very podcast, had Amorim signed off and back in Portugal. Obviously, Amorim's pulled it back since then. I think at the very least, he's got something that he can point to now. For a long time at United, because the results were so bad, there was no kind of foundation, if you want to call it that, or he had done nothing in the Premier League to point to and say, I got it right there. And there was nothing for fans to say, well, if he's got it right there, then there is hope for the future. People were basing their assumptions on him, on what he'd done in Portugal. And I think actually some of the stuff that was said about Amorim was quite disrespectful, because he is a very, very good coach and achieved an awful lot in Portugal. There was some of the stuff that was said about Amorim was suggesting he was some kind of dud, and that's just not the case. I think that he's found it a lot harder than he thought. I think for the first time, a couple of weeks ago in a press conference, someone said, do you feel like you're taking a step forward? And he said, we have no momentum in our club, and we haven't since I came in. And I think for the first time after the Brighton game, that United do have some kind of momentum. And there will be defeats along the way, and there are going to be some absolutely horrendous results between now and the end of the season where the doubts start to bubble up again. But I think for the first time that Amorim has got something that he can point to. Those 3 wins against Sunderland, who are doing well, Liverpool at Anfield, which is massive because they've not won there for 10 years, and then Brighton, a team, the type of team that Amorim has struggled against. Those middle 11 teams, Amorim just couldn't buy a win against them. So to beat a good Brighton side in the way that they did, I think for the first time you can point to something, United fans can cling to something and go, yes, there is something there.
Did you, from being in the stadium, did you sense that the mood had changed a little bit?
I mean, winning at Anfield will do that for a United crowd, but yeah, the roar when the game kicked off was a little bit louder. The Amorim chant starts a lot earlier in the game. It's been missing a little bit over the last few weeks because fans are starting to doubt whether he's the right man. But the Amorim chant comes back earlier in the game. The chances are kind of, the oohs and ahs from the crowd when they're playing well are a little bit more kind of regular because they can kind of see what he's trying to do. Obviously helps when you've got players like Bryan Mbeumo, who's probably a typical Man United player in the way that he goes about it. It's just a handful. Works really hard, gets his body in the way, horrible to defend against. United fans love to see that kind of stuff. It's something to get behind. And it does feel like the mood has changed a little bit. As I say, there are going to be some really, really poor results between now and the end of the season because even against Brighton in a game that they won relatively comfortably, Brighton have a couple of breaks at 0-0, which could have gone a different way. They've obviously come back into the game to make it 3-2, where lots of United fans at the time are going, "Oh God, not again." So they are still quite vulnerable in parts of the game, and other teams aren't going to be able to take advantage of that. But I don't really want to say they've turned a corner, but I'm going to say they've turned a corner a little bit. I just think that this little run is massive for Amorim because it feels like he's finally the United manager. And that seems a stupid thing to say because he's been there for nearly a year, but finally he's got something that he can kind of show fans and like, this is how I want my team to play. You maybe not be able to do it consistently until he gets another summer window under his belt, but there is something there.
I bet he wishes he was facing Ange Postecoglou's Forest and not Sean Dyche's Forest at the weekend.
Although Postecoglou got the better of him, didn't he? Twice last year.
Well, true. That is true. But it was a mess there, Forest.
Yeah, I mean, the next two games, Forest at home, Forest away, again is another game against those middle 11 teams that he just hasn't been able to beat. If you can beat Brighton at home, you can beat Forest away. And then Spurs away before the international break is a massive one. I actually think for the first time, he's probably got a bit of breathing space. And actually, if he was to get a result against Forest and then lose against Tottenham, which he could do because Spurs are playing quite well, not at home, there seems to be better away. But if they were to lose against Spurs, I don't think there would be the huge fallout that there has been in the past after defeats. I think a lot of United fans would kind of shrug and go, okay, well, we're still taking steps forward. That was just a minor setback.
Well, it probably would have been difficult for him to keep his job because if they'd not won these three games and then they go and lose at Spurs and then there's an international break where there's a lot of noise for 2 weeks. But it sort of feels like now he can get to November, he can get to that international break, and then when you come back into that, you're into Christmas and the January window. So if we're not saying that United have turned a corner, Amorim has probably bought himself the rest of the year at least.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think the last time we were talking about him on this pod, we were talking about when it could possibly get too much for the board, and I actually think the board I've always kind of maintained that they're sticking with him, so I wouldn't want to speak for them. Because privately they have been very supportive, but we were sort of talking, would it be November break? Would it be January? I actually think whatever happens now, he'll get the goodwill of the fans will last until at least January. It's not bulletproof, and if they were to lose sort of 5 on the bounce, obviously that would change. But I do think that this run has been so significant for Amorim that he has bought himself breathing space and bought himself time. And it's little things like you get to January and all of a sudden you've got FA Cup games. In the third round of the FA Cup, with all due respect to a League One side, you get a League One side at home and you win, and it's a comfortable win. That's the kind of thing that Amorim has not had in the first start of the first period of the season because he hasn't had Carabao Cup games and he hasn't had European games. So you get to January, you win 2 games and you get to the FA Cup 5th round, and it makes everything feel a lot better. I think that what needs to happen now is he needs to get enough results to get him to the summer, and for the board to back him properly in the summer and then start properly. That's what he needs. There's all this stuff about, he needs to get into the Champions League, he needs to get into Europe. That would be great. I genuinely think that the biggest thing that he can do now is to get enough results that get him to the summer without being in crisis week after week. have enough trust from the board, from Omar Barada, from Jason Wilcox to get him that midfielder he needs, possibly get him a left wing back, and then you start to see his team and what he's capable of. And if it's still not right by the next October break, fair enough. He'd have a long time, and that's fair enough. But I genuinely think that a couple more players, get to the summer, a couple more players, and you'll start to see what Amorim is all about the start of next season.
Okay, well, we should just mention, I think, because they deserve it, Bournemouth and Sunderland. I mean, what Bournemouth are Bournemouth are probably the most exciting team in the league right now.
I mean, amazed at Bournemouth. I saw them play United in the US tour, and they lost 4-0 or 4-1, and they looked awful. They'd lost an awful lot of players. Iraola afterwards, he's always quite a bright guy and quite sort of cheery, but even he looked a bit, downbeat after that, and it was only a pre-season game. And I watched him in that game and thought, I do worry that he's just lost too many players and he's not going to be able to recruit in a way that replaces them properly. And as I say, there's not much, is there, between sort of the top 8 and then getting relegated. You can have a bad season. Bournemouth, Brentford, Brighton can all have a bad season and get relegated. And I thought they would possibly be a candidate for that. But fair play, because what they've done and what they're doing is absolutely unbelievable. And
Sunderland, of course, backing up the tremendous home record by beating Chelsea. And we should just probably mention Chelsea. I mean, it's funny, I was at the Ajax game, and, the sort of piece to do off the back of that was about the youth, and that Esteval would become their youngest ever Champions League goal scorer about half an hour after Mark Guy got the record. And they had 3 teenagers on the score sheet, which is the first time it's ever happened in Champions League history. And, it was all about the next generation. And then sort of 4 days later, you see what youth can give you on the other side of the coin, which is that inconsistency, which is not a criticism of those players. It's the same the world over. You learn through experience to find that consistency of performance, and that's kind of where Chelsea are at the moment. And I guess really this is what they've signed up for. If you're gonna assemble a squad whose your oldest player is 28 in Tosin, then the rough and the smooth are going to come together, because this is not a group that has the experience and the know-how, especially having come from the Conference League. They're back in the Champions League for the first time in a couple of years. They can't, if they drop their levels, they're going to lose games. And another competitive Premier League season, and obviously this Champions League group stage is proof of that.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about Man City with a little interview with Josko Gvardiol. Before that, though, I do want to give you some props, because in the pre-season pod that we did, and we were talking about who might be surprise packages, you said Sunderland and got laughed at a little bit.
I did. Thank you very much.
We've made so many poor predictions on this pod that the one good one needs highlighted. So,
right, producer, can you find that clip and insert it here, please? Thank you very much.
He's shaking his head. Yeah.
Well, next we're going to turn our attention to Manchester City. Rob, you spent some time with Josko Gvardiol at City's training ground. Here he is talking before they played Aston Villa.
We've spoken to Pep a lot this year, and some of the things he said have suggested that maybe people are underestimating this City side. People want to talk about Arsenal and Liverpool a bit, but quietly City are kind of winning games and going on a run. Does it feel in the dressing room that maybe you're going under the radar a bit, that people are underestimating what this group is capable of a little bit?
I would say at the beginning of the season you could feel it. You could feel it. It was just about Liverpool and Arsenal. Yeah, I mean, after the run we have now, I think everyone is getting aware again that we are still here. That we're not just gonna give up, because obviously the season is long. So. Lots of games to play, and I think it's going to be an interesting season. I think each season is even more and more interesting and harder. Every opponent every team you face, especially away. If you play away, it's really tough. And as I said, I think it's going to be an interesting season.
I guess in the dressing room, if you're winning games, but people aren't talking about you and want to focus on other teams, that's quite good for the players, right? You're quite happy just to no noise, just carry on, win.
You're right, yeah. But also, you get like it motivates you when when you see that no one talks about you. They're all talking about Arsenal, Liverpool, which is normal, And they're good teams, and they're doing as well. They're doing good as well. So yeah, but we will see.
Well, Rob, how did you find him?
Well, in terms of like the interview, he's a lovely bloke. You know, obviously doesn't mean much, but you can tell by when guys come into the interview room and want to shake your hand and chat before while they're getting kind of mic'd up. He's a really good talker. Obviously, still quite young. It's easy to forget that he's still only 23. Seems like he's been around for forever after doing what he did at RB Leipzig and joining City as a 21-year-old. But I did ask him, like, are you feeling like you're becoming more confident, more of a kind of a leader in the dressing room now? You've been here for a while, and he said no, which I thought was quite endearing, that he still feels himself kind of one of the young ones, the kids in the dressing room. But I think you can see in the interview clip that was just played there that he's obviously a confident guy. He feels like he can kind of come out with these comments on the title race and teams like Liverpool and Arsenal. Obviously, he was speaking before the Villa game. They had a setback against Villa. I actually think that what he was saying is probably true, that there does feel like there's been a kind of a focus on Arsenal and Liverpool a little bit, where City, before that Villa game, had gone 9 unbeaten. And it did feel like, maybe for the reporters who deal with City day to day, that maybe that they were flying under the radar a little bit, and maybe they weren't getting the credit that they deserved, and they were, you know, genuinely one of the title challengers this year.
Well, he said that nobody's talking about them. We're going to talk about them now, but perhaps not in the way that he would have liked. I mean, obviously they lost by a single goal, a tight game. Haaland misses a great chance. They could have had a penalty. They had a goal ruled out for a correct but tight offside call right at the end. You know, sort of fine margins went against them. But are there more underlying problems that this result may be exposed?
Well, I don't think that Guardiola and Gvardiol will be that panicked by what happened at Villa. They don't win at Villa. They haven't won since 2021. It's just a bogey ground for them, really. They lost there last year, and Pep said that game that they were just a mess. It was in the middle of all the problems they were having with injuries. He said that the body language was awful, didn't create anything, didn't run, didn't work. You know, one of the real low points of last season. What happened at Villa Park on Sunday, I don't think was that. I think it was a tight game decided by a fine margin, and City were on the wrong end of it. So I don't think he'll be too panicked. The one thing that he has raised in the last couple of weeks is he feels that they're over-reliant on Erling Haaland. Haaland scored 11 Premier League goals. No other City player has got more than one, which is an issue. And in fairness to Guardiola, he raised it after the Everton game when Haaland scored twice. And it would be easy to raise it after the Villa game where you've lost, but he raised it after a game that they'd won and said, you know, Haaland scored twice, we've won 2-0, that's great, but other guys need to step up. And I think the game against Villa showed that if an opposition team find a way to keep Haaland quiet and crowd him out and just don't give him any kind of space, I think he got one half chance in the first half, but beyond that there wasn't an awful lot. That you need the likes of Foden, Doku, Bernardo, Savinho, all these guys to be chipping in with, you know, 5-10 goals each. Otherwise, there are going to be games where Haaland just doesn't get that freedom and can't score, and you can't lose those games 1-0 because you haven't been able to get the ball to your main man.
But is this a systemic problem though? Isn't this because the team's set up for everything to go through Haaland? That actually it's only right that he has 11 goals, you know, because everything is set up to go through.
Yeah, well, there is an element of that, and I suppose as Pep would deny that if you put that question to him. You know, is everything designed to go through Haaland? He would say no. But I kind of think sometimes watching City that just in terms of the mentality of the City players, if you've got a guy who's that prolific in front of goal, then surely it's only a natural thing to be constantly looking for the guy that you know can score goals. And maybe that does take the responsibility to score goals away from, you know, Doku and Foden. You know, Foden is a big one. A couple of seasons ago, he was the Premier League's best player and scored, I think, did he get close to 20 Premier League goals, which is just unbelievable for an attacking midfielder. And he has got back to a little bit of form this year, but last season was just looked a shadow of the player that he was the year before. I just think that they need to find a different way to win games, and at the moment they aren't. And it doesn't really matter because Haaland is going to win you a lot of games, but there are going to be occasions where you just can't do it.
When we talk about Chelsea, we talk about the effect that the Club World Cup had on them. Now, obviously, they went all the way and won it. City didn't, but they were out there. They experienced those conditions. They obviously had their pre-season interrupted as a result. How much of a factor do you think that is?
I'm not. Again, Guardiola would tell you not, but it has to be because the teams that were playing in the summer, the conditions were brutal. We were both there and saw what they were going through Obviously, Chelsea went a lot further than City, and City did get quite a long break in the end. So it has to have an impact. I also think that City, they've lost an awful lot of players over the last 12 months. There's an awful lot of experience that's been drained from that dressing room. You know, Ederson, Gundogan, Kevin De Bruyne, Akanji, Kyle Walker. The list kind of goes on, and they are, again, it seems strange to say that about a City team that have been so successful so recently, but they do feel like they're in a little bit of transition, and that maybe the aura or the invincibility that they had a couple of years ago has disappeared, and you know, they're not winning as many games. You know, Alex Ferguson used to say about United that he used to see his team win games in the tunnel because they were so good, and I think that to a certain extent City did that under Pep when they were winning 4 in a row, and I think that's gone a little bit, and I think that kind of frailty combined with the experience that's been drained away, when you put those two things together, it's a big thing to deal with. And I think City are still trying to learn about how to deal with that, particularly when you're going to go to really, really tough places like Villa Park. And I mean, just in terms of you covering Arsenal, if you were looking for a title challenger right now, the one that's going to run Arsenal the closest, are you looking at City as that team, or do you still think it's going to be Liverpool or someone else from the pack?
Well, I find myself changing my mind about this. If you'd asked me that in August, I'd have said Liverpool. I thought Liverpool would retain the title. That looks a long shot already now. I suspect that if you were to ask Mikel Arteta that question, he would, because of course of his links to City, having worked there, having still enjoying a very close relationship with Pep, I think he would say City, because they still, although they're not playing with the same authority that they have done, history tells you that club, and actually we've just seen it really with the 9 games. Yeah. They're the type of team that if no one's really talking about them, or they're not sort of tearing up trees, they've suddenly, you sort of look at their results and you go, oh, they've actually won 10 in a row here, or 8 in a row, or they're unbeaten for 2 months, and they can accumulate. I don't think there's a guarantee that Arsenal can do that. At the moment, you'd have to say Liverpool look a long way from having that consistency. Whereas there's something about City, and I suppose you are relying, a lot on their history to form this opinion, not necessarily what you're seeing with your naked eye week to week. But they are probably the only team that football heritage would tell you that they can put together a run that would cause Arsenal some problems.
So Pep's been saying for a few weeks now that all he wants to do in the first part of the season is to be in and around it. The title, he says, isn't won in October and November. So he wants to get to January and wants to be within touching distance of whoever's top, Arsenal probably, or whoever might be top. And then you kind of see, I'm just looking at their fixture list now. City, they've got Bournemouth, Liverpool and Newcastle all in November. Bournemouth and Liverpool are at home, Newcastle are away. The first game back after the international break, which is obviously always a tough one. We're probably going to find out, aren't we, in November, whether this City team are genuine title challengers or part of the pack.
Yeah, in more ways than one, because there's what's going on the field, and then there's the 115 charges verdict, which no one knows for certain when it's going to be. I have heard a little bit of chat that it might be November, which is no guarantee it will be, because this seems to have been kicked down the road so many times. But you're talking about their Pep saying, he just wants to be in and around it. Well, they could have a 20-point deduction to deal with. That could end their title challenge before it's even started. And what on earth is going to happen then? We have no idea, by the way. Of course, City deny all the charges. We don't know whether it's going to be points or a fine or both or neither. But you must, you're obviously up there a fair bit and have obviously just spoken to Gvardiol. Do you get a sense from around the place that this is hanging over the club?
I think so now. Obviously they are strenuously denying all of this stuff and have done since the minute that it came out, the various charges from UEFA and the Premier League and that kind of thing. But I think they've reached a point now where they just want this to be over, because it's become tiring for everyone. I think it's become tiring for City. It's become tiring for the rest of the Premier League. I think fans want to know either way what's happening with it. I just don't think it's healthy if it carries on, and it's dragged on far too long. Even now, and if it was to come in November, in the international break in November, even that would be too long. But it does need to be out in the open sooner rather than later. I think that it'll be interesting to see what the verdict is and what impact that has on City on the pitch. Beyond any kind of points deduction, but for the next, I don't know, whenever it comes for the next few months, it'll dominate everything. It'll dominate Pep Guardiola's press conferences. The players who stop in mix zones won't be asked about performances on the pitch. They'll be asked about the impact of whatever's happened on the club. If there is a big points deduction, are you staying? Are you leaving? What do you feel? Like, how do you kind of cope with this? The fallout from this could be absolutely monumental. And as I say, it is important to kind of caveat that with, we've got no idea which way it's going to go. Whether City are even going to get found guilty or not. But I just think the fallout, because it's been such a long-running saga and it's become this huge kind of thing now that the Premier League has had to deal with, I think that the fallout in terms of the Guardiola himself and also the players, how they cope with that may play quite an important role in whether they get close to winning the title or not.
Yeah. And I mean, again, it lends itself, to circle back to end where we started, really, it's never going to get better than this for Arsenal. I mean, it does feel as though the stars have aligned for them. If City are hit with any sort of punishment, the impact that will have, because of course the other things that could happen, there could be a transfer embargo, some sort of transfer ban, which means obviously they wouldn't be able to strengthen in January. As you say, the repercussions for a club, if they're hit hard, is impossible to sort of overstate. And you combine that with what's happening at Liverpool, and I don't want to sort of entirely dismiss Tottenham, who are obviously up there, and Bournemouth have had a great start, and obviously Manchester United are back and now in the title race, as you confirmed on this podcast earlier.
Easy,
but you sort of think, well, the general environment leads you to think that this is the best chance that Arsenal have maybe had in 22 years to win the league.
Well, that's all we've got time for on the Football Reporters for this week. Join us again next time.